So we started our own organization in Colorado to do that. It's called Breakthrough. And my wife is currently the vice president of the board, and I'm one of the founders. And I think we're in 5 or 6 different prisons in the state. It's a 9-month program, highly competitive to get in. We've got somewhere between a 1% and 4% recidivism rate, so it's ridiculously low. And it's just I think, to me, the allure was, I looked at the backgrounds of a lot of these people who end up in jail, and you hear a lot about second chance, second chance hiring, give somebody a second chance. And I truly believe in second chances. I mean, we've all made mistakes. I think what was shocking to me was how many of these people had no chance.
Welcome to episode 70 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features my friend Jason Mendelson, a recovering venture capitalist, attorney, criminal justice reform advocate, prolific musician and producer, and all-around badass changemaker and entrepreneur. Jason and I discuss his tough upbringing, the injury that led him away from music for a time, how he fell into becoming a venture capitalist and what led him to retire, and how he's since been focusing on music and social impact. He's written and recorded his own album, played in various bands, and produced works for stars like Aloe Blacc, Billy Gibbons, and many more. His impact work has been vast, highlighted by the organization he founded in 2017, Breakthrough, which drastically reduces recidivism rates for participants that go through their program, which includes work while in prison and reintegration resources when they depart. Jason and I had a great conversation, and I'm excited to share it. Here is Jason Mendelson on People Are the Answer. Jason, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Definitely one of the people I had in mind, when I was first sort of getting this podcast going, in terms of like interesting people doing amazing work that, don't always talk about it. So, appreciate you making the time.
Thanks. Well, I'm excited to talk about anything you want to talk about. You're more interesting than I am. So why don't you take the lead here?
Appreciate it. It'd be great if you could start off by telling our listeners, where you're based, your name, what your current role is.
So I'm Jason Mendelson. I spend about half my life in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I am right now, and the other half of my life in Palm Springs, California. And I currently am wearing a couple of different hats. I'm a senior fellow for strategy for Stand Together Foundation, and I'm also a musician, and I spend a bunch of time doing philanthropic work around criminal justice reform.
Thank you for sharing. And in life in general, what would you say motivates you?
It's been funny. When I was younger, I'm not going to lie, I was very money motivated because I didn't grow up with much of it. Then I got sort of excellence motivated. I wanted to be an expert in my fields. And now that I'm older, what motivates me is learning new things. I've been around the block a few times. I want to do things that I'm learning and feel have an impact. Whether it's an impact on an individual, organization, or even making somebody happy or sad via a piece of music I write. I want to be learning, have an impact, and open to any and all ideas, so long it fits that criteria.
Yeah, I love that, and I'd say it's similar for myself, and certainly appreciate that.
Yeah. So it's as you get older, your priorities change. And so I wonder what the next 10 years is going to look like. We'll see. Ask me again in a decade, and I'll probably have a different answer.
Jason, I noticed that your lighting is changing. You're going through different colors. So for anybody watching on YouTube or Spotify with the video, what's going on?
So I'm actually sitting in my control room of my recording studio right now. So I've got 2 big monitors and preamps and a whole bunch of stuff. This is mission ground zero. On the other side of this window is the live performance space. And there's a bunch of lights that are changing because as soon as I'm off with this podcast, I've got 5 people coming over and we're actually recording a music video. So the lights take a few minutes to get going. I was a little lazy, so I set them up before the podcast, and here we go. I'm looking like Rainbow Guy. So it's that's what's going on.
It's all good. No, I like the ambience that it adds, and I'm fortunate
great.
to have seen your space before. It's an amazing space. So it's going to be a fun spot for a music video later.
Yeah, excited.
So you mentioned, not growing up with much. Where did you grow up and what was life like there?
I grew up downtown Detroit originally. My mom, single parent, and it was scary. I'm not gonna lie. It was rough. It was dangerous. There were a lot of life lessons that I learned very early on. Fortunately, later in my life, my mother remarried and we moved into a much better situation. But those earliest childhood memories were definitely ones based on scarcity more than anything else.
That sounds like a rough place to start, but
I
certainly
didn't
have
know any
climbed your
different.
way up.
Oh, wow, this is awesome. I remember asking my mother once if we had any more food, and she said we didn't have any more food. It wasn't even like I asked, hey, I'd love to have a ham sandwich. We don't have any ham. It was like, do we have anything to eat? And the answer was no. And you're like, all right, I guess I'll come back later. So, but again, I didn't have anything to compare it to.
In growing up, when did music first come into your life?
Um, according to my mother, she told me that one of my first and early toys were the pots and pans with wooden spoons, and for whatever reason, I liked to drum on them all the time. And so there was a guy across the hallway who purportedly was a motorcycle gang leader of some sort. Again, I can't confirm this. This is all what my mother told me later. Stole a Jeffrey Giraffe drum set off the loading dock at Toys R Us and got me this drum set. And so this was my introduction into drumming, which would become a lifelong passion and love. I suppose I guess Toys R Us is bankrupt a couple times over. I guess I should have probably given some money back to them over sometime.
That's a pretty incredible
Yeah,
story,
I think
and
the statute of limitations run out on receiving stolen goods. So I think I can tell that story and not go to jail.
yeah, as an attorney, I feel like you can advise yourself on whether or not to continue with this, or if you want us to edit it out.
Exactly.
Well, what a cool way to get introduced to drumming and then have it become, really a huge part of your life. So, excited to dig into that in a little bit. But uh, this, sort of scary upbringing, but you didn't know better at the time. How do you think that sort of helped make you who you were and how you got where you are?
Well, I mean, I definitely think it programmed me to grind. I mean, I had a belief, and I'm sure this was instilled by my mom that if we worked hard enough, we could get out of there. And certainly not taking anything for granted. I still don't. Really appreciating the good things in life because there's a lot of days where good things aren't happening. And when I'm having a good day, my wife makes fun of me all the time. She says I remind her of an 8-year-old kid because I get so excited and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so happy. Like I tell her, I'm like, I'm so happy right now. And she's like, she thinks it says, yeah, that's my inner 8-year-old. So I think it's, and it's been a positive. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I wouldn't trade my upbringing for the world.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that inner 8-year-old that comes out. It shows that you're passionate about what you're doing, and excited to hear that you're in that spot. And aside from the biker neighbor, can you think of an experience from your childhood that showed the importance of giving back that maybe rubbed off on you?
Yeah, I remember it was so fun. We used to go to Farmer Jack. That was the neighborhood grocery store, and we would walk there because I don't know if we had a car back then. And I remember my mother would pull me on a sled in the wintertime when it was snow, and we'd go to Farmer Jack. And I remember we would always go to the line that had Sue, the checkout person. And I just thought that my mom and Sue are friends, and so why not like go to Sue's line? And I remember one day Sue had a long line and everybody else had a short line. And I was like, Mom, why don't we go to the short line? She goes, because we go to Sue's line. And I remember that was the first day I noticed that Mom wasn't paying for everything that was on the Sue line. So Sue had decided to, I don't know if it's just with my mom or other people, but she made a tremendous difference. Like we couldn't afford everything we needed. It wasn't like we were splurging and getting, you know, ho-hos. Um, and I remember thinking that, the thought of her, embezzling or stealing for the company wasn't, that's the later when I go to law school, that's how I would analyze it now. Um, but I remember thinking about that she was giving us this incredible gift and thinking about, how she was helping us, and it would be great, if at some point you could return the favor. So I think I was on the other side. And now that I've been fortunate and can help others, it's my major passion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing to even have noticed it as a kid. And, to think, maybe she was helping a bunch of other families. Maybe she wasn't, but she was making a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, or maybe she ended up in jail. Like, I have no idea
Yeah.
how that story ends.
Yeah.
Right. I
Well, if
just know.
anyone listening knows Sue
Yeah.
from
Who it's
Farmer
been.
Jack's.
Yeah. This has been a long time ago.
Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. And, I'm curious, what was it like sort of working your way out of there and ending up going to University of Michigan?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, my mother got remarried to, my either first or second favorite human in the world, my wife being one, and my adoptive dad, who is by all respects my dad. Um, he changed my life. I mean, he was, younger. It was a little bit of a tough relationship and in the early parts. But we got much closer later in life, and I remember him challenging me to think about the possibilities of going to Michigan. I remember him challenging me about, you can be a professional drummer. If you work hard enough and you get good enough, you can do this. And he was very hard on me. Like, it wasn't like, there were no participation medals in the Mendelson house home. Uh, but he was the guy he was the first person in my life who said, look, you can be this great. And, when I got into Michigan, it was, I couldn't believe I got in. Like, I still don't know how I got in. In fact, not to bring the conversation down, my mother passed away my senior year in high school. And the last conscious moment I had with her was her reading my acceptance letter to the University of Michigan. And she passed away a couple days afterwards. And I truly believe that she was waiting for that moment to know that I'd be okay. But I owe my whole career to that school. I went there twice. The in-state tuition, the money that they helped out with in the first time around. I mean, it was just an incredible experience.
Yeah. It's amazing that you had that opportunity and, that you're pushed in the right direction. And, you talked about sort of drumming and where that was in your life. So, we talked about when you started off on the pots and pans. What was the rest of your music sort of career as a kid before you got to college?
Oh, I started playing a bunch of shows and gigs and, stuff I should have never, I had no business playing with amazing musicians and whatnot. And went to Michigan assuming I'd be a professional drummer. Was, doing that. And then immediately my first semester got injured and then was told I'd never play again. So that was sort of a big right turn. So, I'm at the height of my powers. I'm feeling invincible. I'm young, playing great. And then suddenly, oh my God, your arm doesn't work anymore. So, I ended up having to drop out of school because I couldn't write. It took me a long time to get my arm back in shape. And then, you know, it, it sounded terrible. Well, at the time it was tragic. I mean, within, a 12-month span or maybe 16-month span, I lost my mom and my drumming career. It was, and then my parents had gotten divorced. So effectively I was feeling really, really alone. And, through that, sort of saying, well, what's important? I'm like, well, music's important. So maybe I can't hold a drumstick, but maybe I can hold a guitar pick. Maybe I can't hold a drumstick, but maybe I can sing. And he's saying, okay, I'm just going to, I'll probably never be professional, but I always knew that music was the North Star. And then, we fast forward here 30 years or whatever, 25 years later, and my hand's back. I can play drums again. I can play whatever instrument I want. I got it. My album's out. I'm playing with different artists. I think it was supposed to happen. Like I kind of feel like maybe, going back to your first question, I want to continually learn and have an impact. And what I don't think I realized was, being a professional musician, there's a lot of repetition, right? You wake up, play the show, get in the bus, go to the next place. And I'm not sure I'm wired for that lifestyle.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's cool to hear how music sort of picked you up from when you were in that low place, and that you found other ways to connect with it.
Yeah, you can always know when I break up with a girl because I always start a new band. It's very funny. The way I get over heartbreak is I start a new band.
Hey, whatever works,
I want
especially
no
when
more
it's
new bands.
something creative.
Yeah, I want no more new bands.
Yeah, I don't think your wife wants you to have any new bands with her, so you're good.
We agree on that so far. We'll see if she keeps me.
Well, is it a story that you share? What happened to your hand?
Yeah, stupid. Um, I was playing intramural football, and I had always played receiver. I was kind of the Wes Welker before Wes Welker, and we were up an amazing amount of points, and so we all started changing positions because there was no way we were going to lose. And I was like, hey, I've always wanted to rush the quarterback, and it was flag football. And anyway, I went to rush the quarterback, and I went to reach for the flag, and he moved, and I didn't get the flag, and I landed on the ground, and I was like, "Ooh, man, that hurt!" And I popped up, and I hear, "Oh my God, look at his hand!" And I look up, and there's this woman pointing in my direction, and I turn around to see who's behind me, and there's nobody behind me. And then I look down at my arm, and a bunch of stuff was in the wrong place. And, and so I was like, oh, this is not good. And I went to the emergency room, and I remember the surgeon saying, hey, look, as long as you're not like a piano player or anything, you're probably going to be fine. And what most people don't realize is that holding drumsticks isn't just holding a stick. There's a lot of finger work in there. And I was like, this is not good.
Well, I don't know if you're a meant to be kind of person, but it seems like it worked out.
It did. It did. I'm really happy. I don't live with regret, not because it's like an easy thing to say. I don't live with regret because I truly consider myself the luckiest guy I've ever met. And I can't pick and choose the past and say, well, I would have changed this or this or this. Well, then I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, and I definitely have some more questions about that coming up. I want to just pop back over to sort of your path briefly. And my research tells me you got into software engineering as well as law school. So can you get into how those things happened?
Software engineering was a mistake. No, it was a fortunate accident. I graduated Michigan with a degree in economics. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. Had never had a career or a job that was outside of music, so that was tough. Unless you count, like, I think I might have lasted 6 weeks at Office Max as a stock boy, but other than that, it was all music. And I met a gentleman who worked for Anderson Consulting, which is now called Accenture. Started talking to him, and he wanted to know if I knew anything about computers, which I did. I was kind of a self-taught hacker. So worked for Anderson for about 3 years doing software development, which was super incredible. They were the company that created sort of professional non-music Jason. That was the first real job I'd had, and so I will forever be grateful to them. Um, I had a mentor there named Richard, who he was a partner, and for whatever reason, he always looked out after me, and such a great guy. And he once called me in his office and said, "Hey, look, you're doing great, but I don't know if you're ever going to be a partner here. You don't have a computer science degree." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's cool." He's like, "So, I'm not going to feel bad if you ever find something else you want to do." And then I started thinking about becoming an entertainment lawyer, trying to go back into the music ecosystem. And then, so I went to law school, and then realized very quickly that entertainment law was not for me. I didn't like the vibe. I didn't like a lot of it. The entertainment industry is kind of a dirty industry in a lot of ways. So pivoted and went into sort of startup law because I had the computer science background, and I always had felt entrepreneurial. And that's what led me to the Bay Area to become a lawyer at Cooley, which another firm that I owe so much to for really, really training me and teaching me to be an adult. And I'll never be able to repay them back.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool path. And to go from a guy that was all music to now working in startups. Uh, you mentioned the Cooley position taking you to the Bay Area. How long were you in that role? And then what was the transition from there to venture capitalist?
So yeah, I was in the Bay Area from, I'm trying to think, 97 until about 2006. So right in the gold rush days of startups, right before the first massive blow up, the .com blow up. I was at Cooley for a couple of years. I intended to stay there forever. I never wanted to leave. I wanted to be a partner there. I wanted to create a really wonderful practice, but I had this client that I was working with that was a venture firm, and they were looking for a general counsel, internal lawyer, and they they made me sort of a soft offer, and I said, hey, no. And by the way, part of it was like, I didn't feel like I was ready. Like I didn't want to leave coolly, but I also didn't feel like I was ready. And, then they put an offer down that was just too good to refuse. So I moved over there, and then started doing operations. So I was doing law, and then I took over sort of the finance and the operations of the firm. And then along the way started doing deals, and without any intention, zero intention to becoming a venture capitalist, I ended up becoming a venture capitalist. So everybody likes to say, how did you become one? How did you make the transition? And why did you do it? I'm like, hey, man, there was no plan. It just sort of happened. I was around. I was working on one particular company that was a legal tech company, which I was, good to help with. And it was a big success. And it really springboarded my career.
Yeah, it's interesting the way certain people fall into jobs. I mean, I feel like a lot of the people I talked to didn't really plan to go where they did.
No.
And I know you spent a while in the VC world. I know you don't love to dig into it too deeply
I
these
don't. I mean,
days.
look,
So
I'm happy to dig into it. I just don't want to do it anymore.
yeah, okay. So let's talk about what was that ride like, and when did you hit that wall that was like, I don't want to do this anymore?
I mean, the ride is incredible. I mean, venture capital's been around since the 60s, so it's a relatively new profession. There was hardly anybody doing it en masse until the 90s. Even so, in the 90s, late 90s, there was, I don't know what the numbers, probably 1,000th of the firms that are out there that are today. And so it was interesting. I mean, when I started as a venture capitalist, it was back in the days where there were like East Coast, West Coast rivalries about what were your term sheets. I used to fight over it. There were, investors that would go out of their way to rip off entrepreneurs and not worry about reputation. By the way, there was no social media. Like it feels like the Stone Age, right? My cell phone didn't fit in my front pocket. And so it was a wild ride. It was, I think when I started, it was, oh my gosh, who are these things called entrepreneurs? Like, I was so humbled and honored and flattered to get to work with these folks that would put everything on the line to try to create their dreams. And I just had so much respect for them. And then, over time, like everything, it became bigger. Reputation mattered less. There was a lot of sort of fake it till you make it, social media, national inquirization of the industry. I think, a lot more narcissism was sort of not only celebrated, but like, uh, coddled, if you will. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It was just, I did it for 20 years.
No, it sounds like when you started, ego wasn't a huge part of it. I mean, if you look back to those days, you didn't really know the investors behind companies that had started and grown. And now it is very like egocentric. There's
Shark Tank.
sort of
It's all about the investors,
exactly
right? Shark Tank's
Shark
all about
Tank.
the investors. It's not about the entrepreneurs. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Perfect example.
for those of you who don't know how venture capital works, there are investors called limited partners, and these can be, your endowment at your university, or a pension fund, or a bank, or an insurance company, or a high net worth individual, blah, blah, blah. They give us money to invest in entrepreneurs. So there's three groups. There's the limited partners, the venture capitalists, and the entrepreneurs. I can tell you which one of those three is way less important. The venture capitalist, right? We're just middlemen, middle people, if you will. Like, it's not our money. We're not doing the companies. Yeah, we have a skill that we can hopefully identify talent and invest the money. I get it. I'm not saying it's worthless, but boy, man, the ego of the VCs that write these checks. And you're like, I always used to remind them, hey, it's not your money, right? like, so yeah, like, calm down. It's okay. You're not a negative on society, but there's a lot of investors out there with massive egos.
Oh yeah, especially I feel like ones that maybe hit it big the first time. And you know, I've been involved in venture capital. There's a million ways to lose. There's a couple ways to be successful. Luck being a big part of it.
Luck be a lady. Yeah.
Um, and if somebody say hit with Uber on their first big investment, now I think I've met those people that are like, that their shit doesn't stink.
Correct. When at the end of the day, I mean, again, it's a valuable service, but we're kind of service providers. We're not different from a plumber, except we don't get paid by the hour.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting perspective on the space, and I know you wrote a book about it called Venture Deals, and how did that come about?
Well, Venture Deal is a pretty funny story. So, my former partner at Foundry, Mobius at the time, is a guy named Brad Feld, who was a very prolific writer. And he came into my office one day and said, I have this crazy idea. And I said, what? He says, I'm going to start a blog. And I'm like, oh my God, who's ever going to read anybody's blog? I was wrong on that one. But he said, I think it'd be fun if we did a series on the ins and outs and secrets of term sheets. And he said, would you be willing to write the first draft? And we'll put it on my blog. And I'm like, so we're literally gonna tell all the secrets about term sheets. And so every entrepreneur in the world is going to know exactly how these things truly work. And he said, yeah. And I'm like, the VCs are going to kill us. And he looked at me, he's like, yeah, at least, something to that effect. So I write this, I don't know how long, it was probably 35 or 40 pages I wrote and just handed it to him in this one lump thing. And he went and broke them into sections and edited them and started posting them on his blog. And suddenly his blog's like the most widely read thing in the industry. We're getting, hate mail from the VCs going, how dare you? We're getting love letters from the entrepreneurs, which, by the way, if you're a venture capitalist, better to be aligned with the entrepreneurs than other VCs. And then the popularity of the blog led to Wiley making us an offer to write a book. So we wrote a book called Venture Deals: How to Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist. And now we're on version 4. I think it's been translated like 11 languages, 8 or 9 or 11. It's like a lot. Like it's, most major languages have it. I have one copy of each language upstairs in my office, which I like to look at. And I got to say, it's certainly been one of the highlights of my professional career, this book. The amount of emails and tweets and messages we get from people saying, oh my gosh, you saved my bacon. And it was so good to have the power, as opposed to just relying blindly on my lawyer and seeing what the heck happened. Yeah, it means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible resource. I've met entrepreneurs that have mentioned it to me when your names come up, and it's really incredible to see what you guys did with that. And so you mentioned sort of the ego kind of taking you out of the interest, getting sick of it. So what was your next move when you decided, like, yeah, no more VC for me?
Well, I thought it was going to be full-time music. I really wanted to explore all the stuff that I hadn't had the time to do, right? I got my health back, so I can play whatever instrument I want. I wanted to write an album with a lot of different genres just to showcase my abilities as a songwriter. I've got no illusions. I'm going to be a rock star on tour. And then I also wanted to work sort of the engineering side, like the technical sides of it. And I started to go down that path. And then I got an offer to work in the Colorado State Attorney General's office on a project regarding returning citizens from prison, which is something I'm very passionate about. So I started an initiative around there, and then was doing music sort of 25%, which actually turned out to be a good mix. I really got into it. Since then I've done, little things here and there that interest me. Music's been a constant. As I mentioned, I do have, a little shameless plug. My stage name is Jace Allen, JACEALLEN. I'm on all streaming services and YouTube. So I brought an album last year, and then I've got a new album coming out this week with a band called Gen 3, GEN the number 3. So I've been really active, but I think it's a good mix. Right now, I have no idea what any day is going to bring, and I love the chaos of it.
Yeah. No, I like that too, personally, just keeping things interesting, having a bunch of sort of options on the table to see what's going to pull you in on that day. And how did you initially get into criminal justice reform work?
I met an organization that was doing work inside the prisons and preparing people with a very set and long curriculum for people to return. So their idea was, by teaching an entrepreneurial mindset along with certain skills, that people who are leaving prison and coming home would have a much better chance of staying out of jail. And the recidivism rates proved it. So we we started our own organization in Colorado to do that. It's called Breakthrough, and my wife is currently the vice president of the board, and I'm one of the founders. And I think we're in 5 or 6 different prisons in the state. It's a 9-month program, highly competitive to get in. We've got somewhere between a 1% and 4% recidivism rate, so it's ridiculously low. And it's just I think, to me, the allure was, I looked at the backgrounds of a lot of these people who end up in jail, and you hear a lot about second chance, second chance hiring, give somebody a second chance. And I truly believe in second chances. I mean, we've all made mistakes. I think what was shocking to me was how many of these people had no chance, right? They grew up in a similar situation that I did, except they didn't get removed when mom got remarried, sort of situation. They had no chance. And so it was beholden on me to see if I could have a small effect, and maybe, it's still too little too late, in my opinion, because of what they've been through, but like, help people live the best life they can, something that where their life has meaning. And that's what, that's what my attachment's been. So much talent behind the walls, so much talent behind the prison walls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that aspect has gotten me engaged in criminal justice reform as well. Just thinking of all the potential behind bars, all of the people that really never had a first chance. There's just so much work to do. And I've really enjoyed learning more about Breakthrough and the really awesome program that you have been able to offer people that are incarcerated. I'm actually going to be joining one of the volunteer days at one of the prisons next month.
Oh, cool.
And,
Which,
looking forward to getting more engaged.
Maybe I'll see you there.
Yeah. I hadn't had the chance to mention it to you yet, but I through your connection to your filmmaker friend Aaron Bear.
Oh, you're going to be
invited me. And,
excellent. I'm a 50-50 because I have another thing to do with Stand Together that day, but my wife will certainly be there. So
awesome. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and really appreciate the work that you do in that space. And I'm curious, since you started Breakthrough, I believe it was in 2017, how has the organization evolved?
Well, we were in one facility. Our first cohort was 20 men, 10 who were, as they would call, model citizens, and 10 who were anything but. There was great distrust from both the participants in the program and the prison staff about what we were doing. Which I don't blame them. They have a lot of people who come and try to sell them the moon, and it turns out not to be true. And frankly, we, while well-intentioned and studying as much as we can, we didn't have the many years of experience with this population, which, fortunately we do now and can better tailor our offerings. But we were having to make a lot of stuff up in the beginning. And so that's where we started. Now we've got, buy-in. I mean, if you think about, like, we were at graduation, one of the recent graduations, there was a correctional officer there that the class valedictorian, because there's a graduation to this program. If you graduate, you get a certificate from Colorado State University. There's a valedictorian from it, cap and gown, the whole 9 yards. And the valedictorian mentioned that one of the correction officers was integral to him succeeding, and a whole bunch of other of the participants said the same thing. And at one point, Jimmy, who was the lieutenant, came up, and 22 incarcerated men in the middle hugged Jimmy to where everybody's crying. Jimmy's crying. The participants are crying. And you're sitting there looking, saying, when we started this in 2017, like, nobody trusted anything. And here we have 20 inmates around a correctional officer, and nobody's sounding an alarm, and they're all crying, and they've all grown together and learned to respect each other through these programs. And, when I'm on my deathbed and I'm thinking about the half a dozen different memories of my life that means something, watching Jimmy and our participants share that moment will certainly be one of those.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it must be rewarding and fulfilling to see the work having that kind of progress and creating that kind of change.
It's I think part of when you asked me why I got out of venture, I think, I had this other life that was developing of having real impact on real people, like massive impact. Like our organization has helped, some of our folks who were wrongly convicted get out of jail. Like, we've helped people leave jail and lead successful lives. I mean, it's hard to beat that.
I mean, I can't explain enough how important I think the work is that you guys do with Breakthrough. So, I really thank you for creating it. And do you have a vision for its future?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's two components. We'd like to be in every state-run facility, right? We've So there's a width, that's the breadth. The depth answer is that we've really, in the last couple of years, really started to focus on reentry services, so that when our graduates leave the prison, that they have a suite of support networks, whether it's people, whether it's money, whether it's housing, whether it's jobs, whether it's mental health, whatever, all of these things that are necessary to have a successful reentry. We're starting to do all of that work as well. So I'd like to see, that be more vibrant, and certainly if anyone's listening who wants to hire this population, please contact me. But I think we have room to go wider and deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just such impactful work. And I think so many people don't realize, people that have been sort of privileged not to be engaged with the system, that when people get out finally, they often are just sort of thrown to the streets. They don't have many resources available to them. So the amount that this is helping the people that get access to it, it's, can't be overstated.
Well, I'll put it in context. The average person who's released from jail gets $100 and basically a bus ticket wherever they want to go. That's what they have, right? Most of them don't have driver's license. Few of them have bank accounts. Okay. So and you think about some of the upbringings these people have had. Now, I ask myself this question. I've got 2 degrees from the University of Michigan. I've got a wonderful set of friends and family. And, I've got whatever smarts I've got from being a software engineer or a lawyer, a venture capitalist, a musician, whatever. Pretty good breadth of experience. If you took all my money away, you took away my driver's license, you took away my bank account, let's assume 80% of my network goes away because I was in jail, right? Or just take it away. I didn't even go to jail. Just take it away tomorrow. 80%, 90% of my network just goes away. What would I do tonight? With $100, a bus ticket, no license, no more money, no bank account, 80 to 90% of the people in my life don't want to pick up the phone. What would I do tonight? Even if I didn't have a record, even if I wasn't in jail? It's terrifying. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to make anything at doing. I mean, I guess I could go try to find a job, but I don't have a bank account or a driver's license, much less a passport or ability to fill out a 99. Like, it just, and then you sit here and, you wonder why people fail to stay out of jail. I mean, I couldn't even do it. I would fail even if I wasn't in jail.
Yeah, I mean, the odds are just stacked up against them tremendously. That's, big reason why we have such a high recidivism rate, but it's awesome to see programs like Breakthrough really lessening that, giving people a true opportunity to succeed. Um, and yeah, I definitely want to talk a little more about some of the criminal justice work, but I didn't want to leave out that, during your venture capital years, you also spent some time as a law professor.
I spent, I think, about 11 years as an adjunct at the University of Colorado with my dear friend Brad Bernthal, teaching a course called VC 360, Venture Capital 360. It was a graduate level course that was about 40% law students, 40% business students, and 20% other graduate students. And it was sort of learning about the whole ecosystem of startups. And we had a ton of fun. If nothing else, it's really fun to pit lawyers and MBAs in class together and tease them. That was super, super fun.
And you actually wrote a book about being a lawyer as well, How to Be a Lawyer, The Path from Law School to Success. Tell me about that one.
As part of the experience of being a law professor and seeing how much the profession of law has changed since I entered in the late 90s versus now. Feeling like, law schools do a great job of teaching you legal theory and thought and critical thinking, but they don't teach you how to be a lawyer, and they certainly don't teach you how to get a job, and how, more importantly, to keep the job. And so I got this idea. We got 26 co-authors. A friend of mine, Alex Paul, and we found 26 co-authors of all walks of life, ages, professions, gender, race, everything. And the idea was for all of us to talk about our transition from law school to the real world. And it's been a really great experience. I actually just talked to the University of Arkansas Law School today. I'm going to be going down there with some of my co-authors and doing an event. We've been doing events throughout the country. And, the idea is to try to take off, try to blow up the black box that is, how do I make that transition? Because you just don't know. You leave law school, you start your job, and then you look up and go, how did this just happen?
That sounds like a very useful tool. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of our schooling, unfortunately, is there's a lot of theoretical things involved, but no one really tells you how to actually go out and do it.
So no, I think a lot of law students get this hoity-toity idea that it's Hollywood. It's, we're legal thinkers. We're all this big, Tom Cruise in the firm or whatever have you. And at the end of the day, we charge by the hour, just like any service professional. We have customers, and this is a customer service business. And you never see law schools talk about that or have any idea how to train their people to be customer focused, which if you're not going to succeed.
I really appreciate your perspective on being a lawyer. And I know that you got to introduce that to a lot of young attorney minds in your time as a professor. So I'm sure that went a long way.
I hope so. I will tell you, now that it's been a few years out, getting emails from former students, whether they're lawyers or MBAs or computer science people, and saying, hey, you had a real impact on my life. Again, going back to that word impact, I mean, it's the best emails you can ever get.
Yeah, I mean, it's really awesome to see what your work has done and who it's impacted. And if you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. As I was preparing for our interview, I saw a company that it appears you started and are presently active with that I wasn't familiar with, SRS Aquium. So I wanted to ask about it.
So yeah, I am one of the founders of SRS Aquium. It started out of a pain point. So if you think about most entrepreneurs and founders, they're trying to scratch their own itch, and this was an itch I was trying to scratch. When a big company acquires a startup, there's usually a lot of different shareholders at the startup, and big company decides, hey, we're going to, we'll get the deal done, but there's always things that go on after the closing of the deal. We don't want to have to deal with 100 different shareholders. Let's have what's called a shareholder representative. And of course, when you're the lawyer around the table, everybody looks to you and says, congratulations, here's your free unpaid job. You're now going to be the shareholder representative for the next 2 or 3 years. Dealing with stuff and whatever, you're getting paid. So you buy your company. So you say, well, even though this job's free, I'll do it. Anyway, long story short is shareholder representatives are a very, very important position. And what was happening is that acquirers were starting to behave poorly and try to mess with the shareholder representative. And so, for instance, in one case, I got sued personally because they weren't happy with what I was doing. And I went to the Verizon store to get a new cell phone. And they said, sorry, Mr. Mendelson, you're not eligible to get a new cell phone because you have no credit. And I said, how is that possible? Like, well, you have a lawsuit over your head. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So I realized, okay, this is a really important position that really ought to be done by professionals, not just whoever happens to be around the table. And 2, oh my gosh, I can't buy a freaking cell phone. So there ought to be a company that does this. And so I started a company, with 2 other guys that originally started basically being a professional shareholder rep. And it was called Shareholder Representative Services because, we're good marketing guys, us lawyers, which turned into SRS Aquium. And anyway, over time, it has become the single largest mergers and acquisitions closing platform in the world. So it does not only rep, but does payments and does insurance and does everything you can imagine that helps professionals close M&A deals. And that's been in a crazy wild ride. Two friends of mine, Paul and Mark. Paul's still the CEO. Mark's been a number of years as sort of the right-hand person there. I'm still an advisor to Paul. But what a great ride, and everybody in the industry uses them. They're the leading company in the space.
It's cool how that is just a little bit of a footnote to all the other cool stuff you're working on.
I'm super proud of it. I don't, I'm not the one who's going to make the resume. That's just not my thing. I'll let you do the research and embarrass me. How about that?
Yeah, for sure. You're certainly not one to talk about your many successes, but yeah, we appreciate you doing so here. And one thing that both your law career and this company brought to my sort of mindset, and you were also mentioning how the attorneys kind of can have sort of this hoity-toity vibe to them, like they're sort of helping steer people in a certain direction. How is AI going to affect law, in your opinion, and even something like SRS?
I don't know how AI affects SRS today outside of my answer for law. So it's going to be really interesting for law. And if there's going to be some lawyers out there who are already saying you're wrong, let me explain to you why I'm right. My wife and I had an issue with a mover recently. We had a mover come move some stuff out of our house in California, and they busted up and broke a whole bunch of things, and then went dark and decided not to pay us. By the way, anybody out there, don't use WeHaul Moving in the Coachella Valley. They're terrible. So that's my anti-pitch. What was interesting was I was wondering what my legal recourse was. And I started thinking about all the lawyers in my life. I got a lot of them. Not shockingly, I don't have any of them who understand moving law in the state of California. Go figure. I haven't run across that person yet. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So I go on Google and I look up moving law California. Well, you can imagine that result. That was like, just like a massive amount of information. I was like, whoa, like I can't handle that. So I'm like, you know what? Let's check out ChatGPT. And I go in and I quickly put in the scenario of what happened and said, go. And it thinks and it thinks and it thinks. And I'm waiting for shit to come back. Pardon sorry, it's hopefully a PG-13 podcast you have. And it comes back. And the first thing it says is, in order to analyze this, we need to look at bailment law in the state of California. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not moving law. Like, first of all, I didn't know the name, like bailment law. Okay, that's helpful. And then it says, in order to have a bailment in California, you need these 4 requisite things, which I look, I'm like, yep, got 1. Yep, got 2. Yep, got 3. Bingo, 4. If these 4 have been met, then liability is blah. And I was sitting there like gobsmacked, like, oh my God. And everything's got like links, which I could click through. So look, I don't know how helpful this would be to a non-lawyer, right? It was still, you had to have a legal, but in 30 minutes, I became pretty dangerous in California bailment law and knew how to help myself as opposed to trying to find a lawyer. So I have this vision that at some point we're going to have things, and maybe they are paralegals. We may already have these, which are people who are using legal tools to provide answers to people with questions that don't want to or can't afford the outrageous hourly rates that most lawyers charge, right? It is such an unfair playing field. He who has the most gold gets the best lawyers and gets the best result. And especially in criminal justice, this is a massive problem. But even just, think about how many times somebody has screwed you over and you can't do anything about it because you can't afford a lawyer. I think it's going to be game changing. I think we're going to find an H&R Block sort of situation where instead of going to a bespoke accountant, you go to an accountant who's got this massive platform of tools that H&R Block creates. And, I could picture this, existing in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that as well. And I think you put it well in terms of someone that sort of has an understanding of the law. The tools already out there are really, really useful. And I can see how that can evolve. I mean, I can also see it evolving into, a chat bot that's specifically designed for the law, where at least for certain things, you even skip some of that step.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it affects things. I mean, so many people out there have these widely varying opinions. Some are doomsday sayers around AI. Some, think it's going to be the next world peace. There's obviously a lot in the middle. Do you have any sort of overall take on where we're going with all of that?
I'm concerned because this is the first, sort of technology that nobody can control its proliferation, that bad people can do bad things with. I mean, we've got bad technologies like, Oppenheimer's deadly toy and, nuclear bombs or whatever you want to call them. But the world has done a okay job in keeping that technology out of bad places. Not perfectly, obviously. Um, this is a technology that is easily acquired. Uh, it's got unknown power. We've already seen examples of it having negative feelings toward humanity. Um, I'm not, I don't worry about sort of the Terminator situation where we have these robots walking around trying to kill us. I'm more worried about an AI that's trained and sole existence is to bring down the Western world's banking system. Um, Stuff like that scares me.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I mean, there's certainly people working on both sides, I'm sure. One way or another, the bad players show up around every technology and product. So hopefully the good ones show up in equal or greater quantity. All right, so we talked about SRS that got us into AI, but now I want to switch back over to music. You talked about sort of going into music full time for a little bit and then kind of becoming 25% of the time, creating your first Jace Allen album with a variety of genres on it, which, by the way, I really enjoyed and still listen to. And so, what was this drawback to music? Was it something that it was always a part of your life and you just wanted to spend more time on it, or did you really take a long break and now you were jumping back in?
I had never had an opportunity to do music with an open mind ever. There was always something else in my life that was a bigger priority, whether it was, family, whether it was school, whether it was work. And I wanted to know what it felt like to try to do music without the guilt in the background of, I should be doing this, or I wonder how many email have piled up in my inbox, or blah, blah, blah. And it was, oh my gosh, freeing to write music in a headspace of this is what I should be doing, as opposed to feeling like I had stolen some moment and I'm going to fit it in. I used to have a music writing partner. We used to say, okay, we've got 90 minutes, go write a song. And we wrote some okay stuff. I don't think anything was great. But I mean, the fact we were even able to do it's incredible. But it wasn't particularly fun. Like, you get this ticking of the clock and you're like, gotta hurry up, gotta get that word, done, or that chord. It was just nice not having that and being able to just approach it organically.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that it was rewarding and you certainly came out with some great content. And you mentioned getting in as well to
Yeah.
producing and that you're the co-owner of Good Noise Studios with Matt Sorum. How did that process start and, how has it evolved?
Well, I've always produced other artists, um, being a multi-instrumentalist, um, and being a rhythm section sort of guy who I think if I have any really great talent, I'm really good at writing melodies, earworms, if you will, that people don't forget. I love working with artists who have a song that they love, but they know there's something not quite right. And that's actually the part of being a venture capitalist and lawyer that I love the most, was fixing problems. Right? People come and say, I got this issue, and I'm like, hey, let me see if I can help you with that. I love taking that part of my brain and applying it in music. So that's from a production standpoint. As far as the recording studio, Matt was a random introduction from a mutual friend. I met Matt. I'm not going to lie. I was a little starstruck when I met Matt. He is one of the best drummers I've ever heard. Um, seemed like a really nice guy. Had no idea if we would ever, hang out again. We exchanged contact information. He was working on a startup and needed some VC advice. And then I got a text from him a few days later and said, "Hey, my friend's band is playing Thursday. Do you want to go see him?" And I'm like, "Sure." Not asking who the band is. I just figured, hang out with Matt. Sounds like a fun time. And, I'm picturing, of course, how any normal person would picture, do you want to go see my friend's band play? You would picture some indie band in a small bar and, whatever. And it was Stone Temple Pilots down at Coachella. So I was like, "Oh yeah, my friend's band." Like, I guess, that works. That's cool. And the story the moment I knew Matt was an incredibly special person is we're there. It's Psychedelic Furs, Stone Temple Pilots. It wasn't during Coachella. It was at the Coachella Fairgrounds. But it was the same venue. And first of all, I'm with my wife. He takes my wife and I, and it's the three of us. And I expected him just to ditch us and go hang out with his friends, but he didn't. And he was being very gracious and introducing his folks. We were having really cool conversations. And at one point he says, "Hey, do you guys want a beer?" And we were like, "Sure." At this point, we're too stupid, naive to realize that all these bands are completely dry now, right? There are no beers backstage anymore for any of these bands. And he goes, "Great, I'll go get you one." And I see him sort of beeline toward the crowd. And I'm like, "What is going on here?" And he walks out of the secure area into the crowd where people are like, "Hey man, hey, what's going on?" Walks to the bar, orders 2 beers, and brings them back for Jen and I. My wife's named Jen. And I'm like, "Who the hell is this guy? Like what is going on?" And I mean, is this guy for real? And over the course of, knowing him for however many years now, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe more, I don't even know. I can definitively tell you this guy is for real. He is absolutely one of the most nice, genuine humans I have ever met. His network of very famous rock stars are all the same. These are unbelievably kind and generous human beings. And when Matt and I decided that we wanted to open a studio in Palm Springs, it was incredible. We're having so much fun with it. It's called Good Noise Studios. If anybody wants to come record at it, please do. We've had a ton of people record already there. It's 4,000 square feet, and my wife and Matt designed it. It's got this really cool, dark, moody Art Deco vibe to it. So it's really sweet. We're having a ton of fun with it.
Awesome. Well, would love to check it out sometime. And I know that
you were invited.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And I know you've had some really incredible artists there, including who you mentioned earlier, fellow podcast guest Aloe Blacc. Well, tell me about some of the experiences you've had there.
Oh my, who else have we had there? We've had, Billy Gibbons, we've had LP, we've had Maniskin, we've had Rick Allen, Fred Armisen's been there, Alice Cooper's been there, Paul Rogers, Izzy Stradlin from Guns N' Roses has been. I mean, the list is huge. It's been a really amazing. I'm sure I'm forgetting a ton. It's weird that it's become somewhat normal to me.
Yeah, I mean, that happens after a while, but it sounds like each experience you're still really appreciative of and really enjoy.
Yeah, the only thing I don't appreciate is that one day I will be dead and I will miss all these wonderful experiences I get to have. Hopefully no time soon.
Yes, I hope you get to pack in a lot of enjoyment prior to that.
Hope so. You never know, though. You got to live every day like you don't know. Every day, I think we're reminded, whether it's through the news or through friends and family, how fleeting life can be. We recently had a young man in our orbit who was 19 who passed away on a hiking accident. Whole life ahead of him. Wonderful family, great girlfriend, and you just don't know. You just don't know when your time's going to be up.
Yeah, it's horrible, and sounds like a rough story, but it's important for us all to keep in mind and make sure we're living our days intentionally in the meantime. And speaking of that, I know you're in a newer band, I believe, Gen 3, that's based in Boulder, and you have an album coming out this week.
I think you know this. I think aren't you coming to see the album release party?
That's my plan. Yep.
All right. Well, yes. It'll be out. Actually, I think it's actually technically hit, but it'll certainly be out by Thursday morning. It is Gen 3 because it is a ragtag group of 3 generations of musicians. So we've got 3 different decades spanning. Yes, 30. Well, actually 4. Well, 30s to 60s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and but originally we only had 3. So thus the name, and we are really excited about the sound we're getting because I've always thought the 70s had some of the most iconic melodies and anthemic sort of sensibilities, but update's great, like new music's great, and so we've got some younger guys in the band who are pulling us uncomfortably sometimes in a more synth heavy, pop heavy dance sort of thing, and it's this crazy sound that we're starting to develop, and I have no idea where it's going to go. But we put together a collection of songs. Some of them sound like they belong with each other. Some of them sound like they're completely out of left field, which is okay. And I think any good band does that. Like you start writing and recording and pushing yourselves, and then just refining your craft. So really excited to have that come out this week.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited to check it out. Really looking forward to that. And you and I share the belief that arts really have a genuine big ability to create positive impact, and to really change the world. So I know you've linked releases to charitable causes, among other things, but would love to just chat more about arts creating impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people use that as a throwaway tagline. I know you don't, right? Arts can change the world. Arts bring people together. But I think that there are a number of artists who are truly using their content. You mentioned Aloe Blacc. He would be at the top of this list as using their platform to show people that we have more in common than we have in different. I mean, think about it. Have you ever, think about it. You go to a show, a concert, and it's freaking great. What are you doing? You're looking around at the people next to you just to look at how happy they are. You're high fiving. You're like, dude, that's cool. Think about all those bonding moments. You don't care anything about them except you know that you share this bond. I mean, it's not that dissimilar from, I walk around and see somebody with a Michigan sweatshirt on, right? 2 tours of duty to University of Michigan. It's like I already feel like we're friends. For all I know, he's a serial killer. Oh, we may not be friends at all, but he's got a cool sweatshirt on, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. It's the same thing with music. And the artists that are taking that to the next level, like Aloe, who are saying, okay, music does bring people together, but I'm going to write messages in my music that explicitly remind people that while they're together having this moment, why this matters. And I find that incredible. I'm not capable of doing that, I don't think. My strength is trying to write a decent enough song that will get enough hits on YouTube that'll raise money for charity. So another shameless plug for Jace Allen, my YouTube videos, each one of them supports a different charity. And for every, and we've raised tens of thousands of dollars for each of these charities. I wish I was Beyonce and can say it was $1 million for each charity, but I'm not Beyonce. But it's not bad. I've got I think 2.5 million hits across these 4 or 5 videos that I put out.
Nothing to sneeze at.
Better than zero. But yeah, you mentioned one of the charities was for Ukrainian family support. One was building tiny houses for for families who have trouble with housing. 2 are for different criminal justice organizations. So those are the 4. Now that I think about it, it's great. Like if you can have impact and do something you're passionate about, that's great. And so I kind of let the audiences of Jace Allen decide where they want to put the money. By the way, there's always like a fundraising component that you can donate directly as well. So I don't want to pitch too much, but even just listening to the videos on YouTube generates money for these organizations.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see how you've tied those together. I will make sure to include links to the videos so people listening can check them out. And again, want to mention, you mentioned Aloe, former podcast guest, or also another mutual friend of ours, Greg Spiros, an awesome musician doing incredible impact work that's also been on the podcast. And then I don't know that you know him, but another of my favorite musicians that is similarly like putting messages into his music is Will Hogue. And yeah, he was an awesome guest that we had, and it's really cool to see how people and artists are using music to bring people together.
Yeah, I know of Will. I don't know him, so that's awesome. Yeah, I wish I could do that. It's so strange. I've tried. I feel, I don't know what the word is. I feel unworthy for me to make the social commentary that some of these guys are able to do, who feel much more worthy to me. They're leaders of their communities. They're leaders of their fans. And I'll work my own ways, but boy, if there's a regret I'll have, it's that I wasn't able to write that song.
Yeah, well, I think just what you're doing to give the platform to the music to help produce it is enough. And you know, I talk about impact in film a lot, and whether it's creating a documentary about criminal justice or whether it's incorporating a cause into a narrative, there's a lot of different ways to help around creating impact.
I mean, you've showed that, yeah, you showed that weed can bring people together, right?
Absolutely.
And what I think it's fun in this day. I mean, look, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, hey man, what do you think about content that shows that weed can bring people together? I'd been like, okay, sure, whatever, cool, sounds great. And now, given sort of how desperate I think this country is for unity, we've got this, in my opinion, we've got 20% of the country doing its best to tear the 80% of us apart. I don't care what brings us together. I want to try to find humanity in every interaction I have, even with somebody who just cut me off on the highway, trying to remind myself this, because it's hard these days with everybody yelling at each other through the popular press channels.
Yeah, it really is a divisive world. And I agree. It's just so important to remember that as humans, we have a lot more in common than we have different. And, it's okay to have different opinions.
Yeah, I totally agreed.
So you talked briefly earlier about your work with Stand Together Foundation. And for the listeners' reference, I think you and I first met through Stand Together, maybe through Shin Choi, and who's one of my favorite podcast guests that I've had. So yeah, I'd be curious to learn more about what you're up to there.
So I don't, it's a whirlwind. I got introduced to Stand Together. I had a Zoom call with Chase. It was very strange. Chase gets a lot of sort of random inbound emails. And in 1 week, he got one from David Cohen, who was the co-founder at Techstars, and Matt Sorum, both saying, you should meet this guy named Jason Mendelson. And I think he was like, wait, what? It's got to be two different guys with the same name, right? Like, it's not the same guy, but it was the same guy. And so we got on the call, and I very quickly learned about the massive amount of time and capital that they are putting into some of the most important issues that are face our country, and specifically ones that I'm very passionate about. So, like anything I'm interested in, I dive in head first. I don't really half commit to anything. And started going to some of the events and meeting excellent people like you, and thinking, wow, I feel like I found my people. Like, I feel like I found a group of people that, it's so funny what we don't talk about. In some ways, I don't know anything about anybody at Stand Together, because we find ourselves spending all the time talking about what excites us and what impact we want to have. And it's crazy. It sounds a little utopian, a little stupid, a little cultish, and maybe it is, but I love it. And so I started digging in on a number of fronts, everything from advising the CEO, Brian Hooks, on some things, to advising, you mentioned Shen Choi. He's head of their ventures group on investing, to their fundraising groups. And now there's a new group called Stand Together Music, which I've been really, really involved with. And it just kind of spirals, and it spiraled into a point where they were like, hey, can you give us a couple days a week? And I'm like, I'm retired, man. Like, I'm done. Like, no. And they basically, they knew exactly how to get me. They're smart. They said, look, we know there's two things you don't have that we have. And I'm like, okay, what are those two things? And I said, one is healthcare. Crazy in this country that you can't get decent healthcare if you're not employed, when you're, my age. So I was like, okay, I'm listening. And they said, and two, we know you have an infinite amount of money that you could, let me rephrase it. I don't have an infinite amount of money, but they know that there's no number that I could have that I couldn't give away. Like if I had $1 trillion, I could easily give that away. And I don't have $1 trillion and I don't have $1 billion. And so the deal they set up is healthcare plus they have supersized my philanthropic bucket every year. And that was the best offer I could have gotten. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I help you do good. And in exchange, I get more money that I can turn to other nonprofits and do more good. And the one selfish thing I get out of it is healthcare for my wife and I. Done. Where do I sign? So it's been amazing. I'm so happy to work with them.
It's awesome to see your VC skills sort of coming full circle into the impact world.
I mean, when I got out of VC, I'm like, I am never doing this again. I'm done. And now I'm back. I'm just back in sort of a different ecosystem, and it's completely portable. I'm really enjoying it. Much of what I didn't like, toward the end of my career, or I would say not like, but was bored of or just needed a change, doesn't exist here, right? I don't have to raise money for the funds. I don't have to go to board meetings. Let me rephrase that. I don't have to go to board meetings. Oh, I'll never be on a board again. I'm working with entrepreneurs who truly are trying to save the world, as opposed to doing it for, I want to get rich or get famous. And if any of these work, the customer isn't just getting a new fancy smartwatch. The customers are getting brand new shiny lives and changing these people's situations. And to me, that's super exciting.
I know you're involved in a lot of different organizations and efforts with Stand Together. Is there any particular organization that the group is supporting that you're working with that you'd be interested in highlighting?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Shin's group called Stand Together Ventures. They are investing in impact companies. So these are all for-profit companies that are, in sort of common nomenclature, triple bottom line, but are really just impact companies. These are companies that are for-profit, but its main goal is to improve people's lives. And it's a great group of folks that Shin has hired. They're mission aligned, they're smart, they're hungry, they want to do the right thing. And the entrepreneurs they're finding are incredible. And so it's been really exciting, and I've learned so much. It's a very different world in some ways than my past, only for-profit companies with no other considerations. And it's also amazing to see the quality of entrepreneur that they're able to find that, has left Google or has left some other big company to start these companies. It's promising. Like, it gives you hope. Like, we talked about some negative about divisiveness and other problems. You see this quality of entrepreneurs saying, you know what, I want to fix these problems. Maybe there's some hope yet.
I mean, I definitely feel that there's a trend in the younger generation to want to create impact in the work that they're doing, not to just create dollars, and certainly seeing that through the work of Stand Together Ventures Lab. And highly recommend anyone listening that wants to learn more about that to go back and listen to Shin's episode. We can update it sometime. But yeah, I also am just a tremendous fan of what they're doing. And I also think it works to emphasize a point that I'm constantly pushing on the podcasts, in that whether something's a nonprofit or a for-profit, how it's classified in that manner doesn't necessarily dictate, its impact. A lot of things are more sustainable if they are structured in a quote for-profit way, but that doesn't mean that has to be their number one goal.
I agree. And I think what's going to be interesting to me, I think there's going to be a big blurring of the lines of what it means to be a nonprofit. And insofar as that, so many of these nonprofits now are able to demonstrate that they are saving states and the country X dollars. Unambiguously, we've done this work. It cost us X. We raised $1 million and we saved you $20 million. You should be funding us. We should be a line item in your thing. And you're seeing more and more of that, where the private sector is creating nonprofits to prove the thesis. And then the governments are saying, man, this is way more effective than what we're doing, right? Right now it's costing us $20 million to do nothing. So we can pay you $1 and get the same thing done. Oh, wait, it's even better. Like, you're seeing some of these absolute preposterous mathematical outcomes for the bonus, right? Preposterous in a good way. And I think that this, it's like using nonprofits as an innovation lab for government.
Yeah, and I like the idea of sort of escaping the bureaucracy of the government and just saying, "Hey, we're a private organization that figured this out on our own. It's working. Pump some more money into it. We'll show you with stats that it's going to keep working. You guys don't need to intervene further."
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
So that's been cool to see, and so much of your work has affected a lot of people. You talked about at the breakthrough event where you had the 20 inmates around the one correctional officer that had helped them so much. Are there any other specific moments or events where you just really saw the direct impact of your work and it really hit you?
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, if we'll go way back in time, we briefly touched on this. The first company I got to work with when I was a non-venture capitalist inside a venture firm. So at this point, I'm a lawyer, and I think I was running finance at the time, but I certainly wasn't a VC. As I met this company called Stratify, and Stratify had created this technology. This is back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, that basically could comb the internet and take all this unstructured data and automatically structure it. And their original idea was they were going to do like personalized web pages. Like you'd be able to say, "Hey, I'm interested in Michigan Wolverines football and like 1971 Corvettes or whatever," and it would just you'd do that. And it didn't work. And they had this idea. Well, what if potentially we could use a big data set? This was before the term big data. What if like we could look at big data sets and organize them? And the company was going down the tubes, and the partner at the firm didn't want to be on the board anymore. He's like, "It's probably going to go down zero. Jason, why don't you just take it so we don't get sued?" All right. So I jump on this board, and I go to meet with the entrepreneur and his management team, and he says, "We're so happy you're here because you're a lawyer." And I'm thinking to myself, nobody's ever said that before. That's the first time anyone on this planet has ever said those words together. "We're so happy you're here because you're a lawyer." He says, "We think we could automatically read legal documents and organize them. And there's this thing called Enron. Remember the Enron explosion? If we had been able to read those documents, we would have found a needle in the haystack that would have found everything wrong." And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." So this company turned into what now is known as e-discovery, electronic discovery. And that's not the name of the company. It's an entire ecosystem of companies that do this. And it was one of the first companies to ever try to do this. And I remember just learning so much. And I thought about you asked about impact. So first of all, impact on the world, it has saved, I don't know, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in legal fees for people who have legal issues that the computer can read it. So you're not paying a human to do it. So it democratized a lot of that work. If I look at the impact of every single person on this team was a first time sort of startup employee, 75% of them were immigrants. There was a huge outcome to see how it impacted them, their children, their lives, them to go on to do other companies, like this waterfall, which I can't believe. And, from a personal standpoint, the impact is I've got probably too much credit, not probably, I got too much credit for their ultimate success. And then suddenly entrepreneurs are like, "Oh my God, you were on the board of Stratify. Will you look at my business plan?" I'm like, hey, I'm not a VC. Like I said, this was the beginning of we don't care you're not a VC. You got all these entrepreneurs coming to talk to you, talk to them and evaluate the business plans, and then start doing investing and sitting on board. So I think about, that was the first time I got to see in person the impact that a startup can do as far as changing generations in these families, changing all these lives to their customers in a positive way. And it changed my life. It completely changed my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think of, for all of that incredible stuff that happened with the people that worked there, the immigrants that were on the staff. How often are we not sort of nursing that potential in other areas and they're slipping through the cracks when, it could have housed people that were going to create all this impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm really happy that there's a greater focus on diversity of founders and not forgetting, that everybody has talents. I mean, if I can go into prison and they can pitch me business ideas that make my jaw drop, who else outside of prison are we forgetting to talk to, because maybe they've got a jaw-dropping idea as well.
So now is the point. If you'd like, you can ask me a question.
What is the biggest mistake you have made with respect to this podcast? Whether it's what have you learned that you were like, oh my gosh, or if you could go back and re-interview a guest because you're like, I can't believe, like, what's the biggest learning / biggest mistake you've learned while doing this podcast?
Interesting. I'd say the first thing that really comes to mind is just technical issues where it's like, if I'd already done this 5 times, I would have known. But to think of, I also just like where I record right now, we've got a siren coming in. So, but yeah, in terms of a better answer to that, probably when I think about the essence of like why I started the podcast, it was really to share amazing people that I'm meeting with the world. And I'd say as other people sort of outside of my network have gotten interested in it, I've maybe brought on people that wanted to be on it, and I wasn't following that initial sort of
the self-promotion, I want to be on your podcast person.
Yeah. And not that that's a horrible thing, but just I initially had this sort of dream around sharing these amazing people that I know and love with the world. And I feel like at moments it's deviated from that. And I've been trying to kind of get back on that path. You are certainly one of those guests that I love the idea of sharing with the world. And so while I didn't probably give a great answer in terms of like a huge mistake that I made, I think just sort of veering off the path has been something that I need to maintain awareness of.
That's great. Stay true to the mission.
So, aside from family, if everything were to end tomorrow, we talked about that earlier, how fleeting life is. What are you most grateful for or most proud of?
I mean, the short answer is I'm probably most proud of my work at Breakthrough. The longer answer, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this because it sounds a little egotistical. So I don't know how to say this. I maybe if you've made it this far on the podcast, maybe you don't think I'm a raving egotistical lunatic. I'm really proud that I have always seen opportunity and never been afraid to try something new and go for it. And I don't mean just professionally, but I mean personally, I mean professionally, I mean philanthropically, I mean musically. I don't know why I don't have that fear of change gene. And I'm really proud that I continue to just find new ways and new things that are like, even this morning, somebody presented me a crazy idea and I'm like, okay, sure, let's give it a shot. That's what I'm really proud of.
Yeah, I don't think that's egotistical at all. And I think that is part of what has gotten you from growing up in really difficult circumstances with no money to where you are today. And to all of the things that you've accomplished and the things that you've earned, and to now all the people that you're helping. So I think that, long term, that has really served the world well. So I'm glad you have that as well.
You were nice to say that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And, the big question that I ask all the guests, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be? And how do you think that change would reverberate?
You gave me a heads up you were going to ask me this question. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've had some time to think about this one. And the first one was, it's got to be climate change, right? Because, oh my God. And then I decided, no, that's actually not it. I would change this divisiveness that we're seeing all over the world. It is not a uniquely American problem, because if we can come together, we can fix problems. If we can't, then we are the problem. And so I think the number one thing would be this partisan divisiveness, populist, whatever you want to call it, that is sweeping the globe.
That would certainly go a really long way to helping our world. And it could end up solving things like climate change as people come together and want to actually protect the home that we all share.
Yep.
So everybody listening, I'm sure, is inspired and now really invigorated to go out and do great work and to help. How can people listening support you and your impact?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I don't know if I deserve that. I don't know if I mean, if somebody were inspired, please go look up Breakthrough, which is my baby, and contribute or contact me. I mean, that would be if you want something simple. But I think, if we take the line from Techstars, which I spent many years as one of the first people around the table there, and talk about the give first mentality, is I think the best way to support anybody is to give to your community, because it all gets interconnected. At some point, you giving to something in your community is going to improve mine. And so I would say, do what you're passionate about, and that good will grow exponentially from whatever your efforts are, and help us all.
Yeah. I think that's a really good perspective for everyone to take into life. And, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us. And, I think we should do a follow-up soon after I go to some of these Breakthrough volunteer events and learn more about the program.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thanks so much. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.